Welcome, teacher friend. I'm Lori.
And I'm Melissa.
We are two literacy educators in Baltimore. We want the best for all kids, and we know you do too.
Our district recently adopted a new literacy curriculum, which meant a lot of change for everyone. Lori and I can't wait to keep learning about literacy with you today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Literacy Podcast. Melissa and Lori love literacy. We are very excited about our special guest today because she is a teacher. And we love teachers. So Lindsay, thank you for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, you're kind of famous because is this your second podcast or
it's my second one? Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know if you'd been on other podcasts.
No, not yet.
She just does the podcast rounds.
Yeah.
Podcast circuit. So Lindsay was on the Amplify podcast and we heard her story, and then she actually emailed us when we were talking about sound walls, and it kind of prompted this larger conversation. And we said, hey, you're a podcast veteran. Come on our podcast.
Yeah.
Our Twitter friend.
Yes. I love Twitter.
Well, welcome.
Yeah. Tell our listeners a little about yourself, Lindsay.
Okay. Well, I'm a teacher. I'm a mom. I have 4 children. I've been teaching, let's see, how long have I been teaching? Like 10, this is my 10th year, I think. So, I taught second grade for 5 years. Then I had this, big kind of break while I stayed home with my children. So I have like this 12-year gap. And then I returned to the classroom. I taught kindergarten for 3 years, then second grade last year, and I'm teaching second grade this year again. So
awesome.
Yeah.
I did love second. When I taught, I loved teaching second grade. Anything younger than that, I think like kind of drove me insane. Like, I like second and older, I was totally okay with, but I am excited that you get to apply what we're talking about today to second grade. Because we have that.
Yes.
I love that context. So I'm excited for this conversation.
Great. And I used to be like you, like when I first taught second grade, I just thought, I could never teach kindergarten. And then when I went back, I loved it. And I love the idea of being able to prevent some of those reading difficulties, right? So it was great.
Get them from the start.
Yeah.
So you had like a little bit of a transformation throughout those years.
Yes.
In the way you thought about teaching reading. Do you want to tell us a little about?
Yes. And I'm sorry for those that watched Amplify or listened to, because it's a little bit of a repeat, I guess. But yeah, the first 5 years of teaching, I was heavily trained in balanced literacy. I loved it. And I always said, it's the best way to teach reading. But of course, it's like the only way I knew to teach reading, because that's what I learned in college and my early years. And then when I returned to teaching, after that gap, I had a couple things going on at the same time. I was teaching kindergarten, and it's like the first time I really started to see, I didn't like using those 3 cueing strategies, which I never had realized they were so damaging before. But now I was like, we spend all this time teaching the letters, and then I bring them back, and I'm so excited to show you how now that you know those letter sounds, you're going to be able to read. But the books I had were all, those predictable, repetitive texts. The only way to get through them was by relying on the pictures and context. And so suddenly I found myself saying, oh, wait, you can't sound this one out. Look at the picture. Does it give you a clue? And it was like just making me cringe, because I thought, I'm giving these guys the wrong idea of what reading is. And I really want to solidify those sound symbol correspondences that we've been practicing. And these books are not allowing me to do that. So I started just to get a little uneasy about the things I had been taught and how to teach reading. And I just was frustrated that year, I remember. And then at the end of that same year, my son was diagnosed with severe dyslexia. And really that is what got me on the path that I am now, because then I started researching, what do those with dyslexia need to read? And that brought me to a research base of what everyone needs to read and what the brain does when we read. And so I learned more and more. It was like a starved animal. I just couldn't stop learning and reading. And so that, and then I started, it took me a little while. Like it was still like a a year until I felt comfortable enough to work with my own son. And I had more training and had done more reading. And then everything that I was applying with my son, I would apply in my classroom. And just seeing that difference really, showed me just, how much better this approach was.
I want to know more about the difference, but first I do want to dive in, note my play on words, to your really famous blog post that Sink or Swim. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that, because I think that I think it's a fabulous analogy, which is I think what made it kind of rise to the surface. I worked really hard on all of these really fun puns. Melissa, are you catching them all?
You're diving deep.
Diving deep. I'm reminding myself of Kier, because Kier is like the pun king, and I feel like I'm like, oh, this is too easy. So thank you for naming it Sink or Swim, Lindsay. But I think that if you share a little bit about that might be able to help listeners put into context, what you learned.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I just remember sitting in my kids' swimming lessons, and my two little boys, they were in these group lessons forever, but they hadn't learned to swim. And then they were I just remember watching them literally walking across back and forth the pool, and all the other kids are actually swimming back and forth. Right. And then they're doing their little arm motions, and they're like waving at me, "Hey Mom, we're swimming." And I'm just like, oh my gosh, we need private lessons, and so I was just thinking about that. And then I was thinking about, reading, and like that first year I was teaching kindergarten, and then my years of teaching second grade, and how they're kind of memorizing the pattern of the book, and they're looking at the picture, and it looks like they're reading. Mm-hmm. And first grade, it might look like they're reading. And second grade, it might look like they're reading, because they've gotten so good. Some of these kids and they're smart, and they're really good at guessing from the context. And then suddenly they get into harder books, and the teachers or the parent might realize, oh my goodness, this student can't read, right? You have to look a little deeper. And so I think a lot of times you hear, teachers are a little put off when they hear like, what? The 3 cueing strategies are wonderful, and my kids are reading. Look, my kids are reading. And yes, it looks like they're reading, but you have to dive a little deeper. And, especially in second grade, you can see it when we do the Acadience, screening 3 times a year. And at the beginning of the year, I will really see that where they don't do too bad on the passage, but on the nonsense words, they can't read them at all. And that is just so interesting to me, because I'm like, this is one who's kind of slipped through, and we need to build, his or her phonics knowledge, among other things. So it's just, I just think, there's this appearance of reading, and it really takes a deeper dive to, what's happening under the surface. Are they actually swimming, or are they just walking through that pool?
Yeah. I love our very first episode, we have an analogy from swim lessons as well. It was not about the same one, but I just love it. Like, but it reminds me too of like, I think it was one of Emily Hanford's podcasts, where like there's an adult, right, who is looking back and seeing her child do these things. And she's like, those are the things I did to like pretend I was reading, right? Like, why is my daughter being taught that? When that was
exactly. Kids naturally want to do it, right? They just naturally do. They look at the picture and they want, and so we don't need to teach that. They're already doing it. We need to scale it back. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was teaching second grade, I always had this like little uneasy voice in my head thinking, well, what happens when there's no pictures? I feel like then that kind of drove me to start reading and learning a little bit more, although it did take a really long time to make the transition. And so I'm wondering, like, what differences did you see? You mentioned differences earlier, like pre-science of reading in your classroom and post-science of reading in your classroom.
Yes. Well, and that just also made me think of, back to that reading, like the kindergarten years, it's a lot easier and faster to listen to a child if they can guess and memorize the pattern of the book.
Oh, that's
it's
a good
just
point.
so like, oh yes, this is great. And then you give a child a decodable book that they've got to like, just plod away, and it's slower. But in the end, in the long run, it's going to help them more. Right.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of things that are different. I just remember, and I described this in the other podcast too, so I'm sorry to repeat it, but it's just really how I felt in my early years. I felt like there was this fog over me. Like I just didn't understand, really the process for learning to read. So I felt like I taught phonics, but I had no scope and sequence. And it was just kind of, what word chunk should we learn today? Oh, look, in our story, it's this one. So we're going to talk about this word chunk and we'll put it up on our wall. And, it was just really kind of reactive to whatever the story was. And so I feel like now I just am so much more intentional and explicit. And I feel like I have so much more clarity where I know what to do if, a child is struggling, then I know I'm going to drill down. I'm going to do a diagnostic. I'm going to see where their weaknesses are and work on that. Whereas before I was just kind of like, well, okay, they're on a guided reading level D and we're just going to keep going. And we're done with the D's. I think they're ready to move to an E. Right. Okay, now we're going to plot our way through the
fingers,
E's.
They move up.
Sometimes the E's were easier than the D's. I don't know, And so it's just kind of like, we're going to keep going. I'm going to do our little book walks and we're going to talk about the words in it. And somehow magically they're going to learn how to read. So, and the thing is that works for some students, right? Mm-hmm. But not for all of them. So I love that now I have a clear path of what to do to help all of them. Mm-hmm. So, and I think before I never, phonemic awareness wasn't even on my radar. So now I teach that. I teach phonics with a scope and sequence explicitly, understand the role of fluency, and we work on fluency. And, understand the role of background knowledge and vocabulary with comprehension. So it's just like a complete 180 from before.
For sure. Are we still doing some puns around diving deep?
Of course. Yes. Okay. All episodes. Feel free.
I'm wondering if you can dive a little deeper, Lindsay, into
yes.
You mentioned like assessing your students and then like knowing what to do with them. And I'm wondering if you can just like give some real explicit, like talk to other teachers. What do you do?
Yes.
Yeah. We really want to hear very much get into the specifics. And I think that's going to be something that helps like our podcast be different from the one you already did with Amplify.
Yes.
So, although yes, of course your story is the same because it's your story.
Yes.
We want to go really deep. So start us off with this assessment strategy.
Okay. Well, first you should know that I'm a total nerd. And like if I'm bored, I might just analyze my students' progress monitoring data. So I love the role of assessment. And I heard this great quote in a presentation last year that said, if you're not doing anything with the data from your assessment, then you probably shouldn't be giving the assessment. And I love that because it's really, there should be a purpose to it. So we use Acadience, which is, Dibbles Next, formerly known as Dibbles Next. So we give that benchmark 3 times a year. And then I will use that for progress monitoring as well. So I can track how my students are doing. And then from there, I take all my students below benchmark and I give them a diagnostic, the core phonics survey to see where their phonics are. And also the past. So we can see how their phonemic awareness is. And my favorite assessment is just the informal assessment that I'm doing every day. I probably rely on that the most because, while we're doing our phonics lesson and we're doing like dictation, I'm walking around and I'm noticing, who keeps missing, like right now I have a couple students that keep mixing E and I. I'm like, okay, I am pulling these 3 to my back. To my table later, and we're going to be doing a little, vowel intensive with them. And so just watching them, and then in my small group time too, which is one of my favorite times, then I'm really listening to each student, how they're reading, what we need to work on, so.
Yeah, I think what makes this really interesting is that small group in a structured literacy classroom sometimes can be confusing or tricky. And I think it's because there's that misunderstanding that, or I guess the way that we quote did small group and balanced literacy is not the practice that we're using currently. And so I think I would love to hear more about what happens during that small group time, both at your table, but also, out in the space of your classroom and
in the wild.
In the wild, I know. I was trying to think of a swimming reference, but I was like on safari in the jungle.
Yeah. Okay. So I think small groups sometimes gets a bad rap, and yes, it doesn't replace my whole group instruction. I take that very seriously, and I'm very explicit and systematic. But wow, I value my small group time, and we call them centers, because like, when else are you going to do your tier 2 intervention? And there's some things that you just, I want to give my students lots of time to practice, and they need practice with feedback. And that's when I can be giving them feedback. So yeah, right now, I just have 3 other kind of centers going on, and I keep them really simple because no one has time for that. Right. When I did, I
think that every teacher listening is like, whew, thank goodness Lindsay does simple centers. Thank goodness. So one of my centers, is reading. And before, some people are, silent reading is going to be a waste of time for students that are struggling to read, because they're either going to sit there and stare at the page, or they're going to,
pretend to read.
Pretend to read. Yes.
Pretend to read. Yes.
So everyone has the option to do audiobooks, and there's a great app. It's free for educators. It's called Epic. And so my students can choose whether to read Epic or read a book. And we do a lot so that, this year, I haven't had a problem. Last year, I noticed that I had some students that I knew they were my struggling, some of my most struggling readers, and they would get out, I just remember this one little girl would get out this huge book, chapter book, and sit there. And I was like, oh my gosh, what? Oh my goodness. And so I really had to have everyone one day use Epic and kind of show them what it was. Anyway, most of them, everyone loves it. And so now it's totally okay. They know they can listen to the audiobook and they can follow along. Epic also just has digital books that they can just read on there, right? So there's more of a selection. And
is it free?
It's free for educators. Yeah.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Until in my time zone, until 3:00. So my kids know after 3, sometimes when they're done with something, they want to do Epic, but it's after 3 and it's like, sorry.
That is really funny. I didn't think about that. And it is books that they can choose from. Can you share how they use that? Are there levels in Epic? I don't know much about it.
It's just this big library of books. And so I could create some teacher picks, but they can go in by genre. And then some of them are read to you. A lot of them are read to you. And so it has this little, symbol on it that they know that then they could listen to it and follow along. And everyone loves to do that. And then everyone has access, right, to grade level content. Mm-hmm. So it's great. There is one thing I would tell the listeners out there is to disable the video. They could watch videos in it. So I just disable that so that they're not watching videos, but they're just accessing the books.
That is a great tip. Thank you.
Yeah.
Also, as a parent who's now going to download this app, I'm going to disable the videos.
I was like, this is why Lori's asking questions.
Yeah. For sure. Well, I was also thinking I want to make the point for listeners, this is not a leveled reading app. This is an app where kids can choose the books that they're reading, and
they can create their own little library, so they can go to that. Really the teacher can create a library. So I could do here's a bunch of Halloween fall books, and they could go into that group.
Yeah.
And pick one
it could be seasonal. I'm imagining it just being so powerful, especially to build knowledge on what they're learning in, the core curriculum. That would be very exciting to think about.
Yeah. So it's great. And then I have a great selection in my classroom as well of books that they can choose. So that's my one. That's our reading center. Cool. Then we have our technology center, and that I have them in a reading software program. So they do that. So that's great because both of those are no prep, right? and then I have a writing center, and there's different things. Every week we have kind of a paragraph that we're working on. So I have a writing center, but it's not my writing instruction, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So kind of before when I did more balanced literacy, it was kind of, that was our writing prompts, right? But you need to actually teach them how to write too. So, we've already in our whole group, we've had a writing lesson where we have, we're reading a text, we make an outline from the text, and then on their own, independently, they're going to create a paragraph from that outline that we did. And so that's one of the things they're working on the writing center. And then if they're done with that, then I do have we have like a monthly journal with topics, that they can write about. And then sometimes I have out different little writing pages that they can get where they could write, a letter to someone or, a story of something they want. So anyway, so that's the writing center. So those are my 3 main centers I use right now. I used to also do a word work center, and I had different in kindergarten. When I taught kindergarten, it was great. We had different, I would differentiate those so they knew which bin to get that. And they would work on, some were working on matching uppercase and lowercase letters, and some were working on spelling CVC words. And that takes a little more work and prep. And then, making
if we're being honest, right?
Yeah, it does. It takes more work and they can get off task easily. So, I would have, some really cute, I wanted to do some hands-on things, but then I had little alphabet rocks and they're matching them, but then some might start stacking them and not really.
Yeah.
But because of COVID last year, I couldn't do hands-on things because we couldn't share supplies. Yeah. Right. And so, I was like, well, we can just cut it out, I think. And it was fine. I didn't actually really miss it because it was easier not using them. And my kids were still engaged in the other 3 centers. So
yeah. Can I tell you that those are the things that I feel like I see a lot on Instagram, addressing phonics, creative ideas for phonics centers or activities to do with your students. And they're using the puppets and Play-Doh and different tiles and such. And I imagine that just from having been a 2nd grade teacher, I imagine that if I'm using them, that it would have to be for a very brief period of time. Yeah. Because like you said, I'm my own 4th grader. And I mean, personally also, I can't resist popping the poppet.
It's kind of
very addicting. So I'm curious, how much time do kids spend in these centers? Poppets aside.
Well, okay. So right now my entire, center block is 50 minutes, 50. So I know people that do it shorter. But I have a lot of students I need to meet with in small groups. So I keep them. So, you just kind of divide that by 3. That's how we are right now. Sometimes I put in a 4th center if I have sometimes I can have a parent helper come in. So last week she came in and played contraction bingo, with the kids and had a little group. And so then I think I extended about 5 minutes, so anyway.
So 15 minutes or so, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah.
And then that also is your small group time. So you would spend 15 minutes with your small group.
So how I do it is I don't assign myself a group. So I have my students and I wish you could come in my classroom and see.
I know. That's not exactly what I was just thinking.
Are you going to work after this? I wish we could just
take us with you.
I have a PowerPoint that has the 3 centers there and everyone's names under the PowerPoint. And then I had made this this timer that's filling in with blue. So the kids know as soon as it's all the way blue, the PowerPoint switches. I don't have to do anything because it's all on a timer. PowerPoint switches, music comes on, and then they know they have until the end of the music to get to their next center. It's 30 seconds, and then they do their next one. And even when I taught kindergarten, I mean, it was just this well-oiled machine, and people would come in my room and be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe these kindergartners. And everyone knows exactly what they're doing, what they're supposed to be doing and why. And I'm like, yes. So anyway, I have them assigned out. I don't have a group assigned to me because I don't want to be tied down, because sometimes one day
that's working. Probably what makes
more with one group or sometimes it's shorter with another group, or, I'm switching the order because I know someone has to be pulled out or someone's checking out and I want to make sure I get their group before they check out or whatever. So that's how I work it.
I love that.
So simple. That's why it's like easy for the kids to manage. Cause you're not like, today we're doing the Poppets Center and the reading and this and that.
Yes. Yeah.
It's very, very
it's just
focused.
simple and really they love it. And it's fun to see what their favorite is. Like some, just love the reading center. And then I have some that love the writing center. And then they're like, I have this journal at home. Can I bring it and write when I'm done with my, whatever? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And so it's fun.
Oh, so fun. I want to come to your classroom.
I know.
And then what I'm doing with the ones that are coming back is kind of, I have some groups that are more focused on just our phonics, right? And decoding. And I have some groups that are a little more focused on fluency and some groups that were a little bit more focused on just the comprehension because their fluency is down, vocab and comprehension and building their background knowledge. So I just, have different goals, I guess. But my number one goal in my small group is to do what I can't do in whole group. And and really I love that is listening to them read and giving them feedback, right away. And so we don't, I have everyone reading at the same time out loud, which sounds crazy. It's really not. They're like whisper reading. And then I lean into one to listen to how they're reading. And then I lean into the other and I will stagger start them so that, they're not like at the same place as the person right next to them. And so I can be listening to them as they read those books. So
that's so cool.
That's what I do.
I just want to stamp this because I think you said it all already, but in terms of like how the students get into those small groups, it sounds like you give some, the different kinds of assessments that you mentioned already. That might be part of it, but you also said like, you might just listen to a student in whole group that day and hear something or, like we gotta pull these three into a group. So it might be like based on informal assessments as well. So it sounds like it's just like constantly changing. Probably.
Yeah, it is very fluid and it's changing. Or like I have one little girl who's reading is pretty good. And then I just noticed her spelling and her vowels and her spelling. And I'm like, what is going on? Because there's such a difference. And writing always usually lags behind, right? But so much so that I was like, okay, I do a little more writing with this group because this other group that I have, we're just really solidifying their grapheme phoneme correspondences. And so we do like word chaining. And I thought, okay, I'm going to switch her to this group so that she gets the time with the word chaining because we need to work on that with her, and then I can still, work on her fluency as well, but that's kind of the focus of that group. So anyway, it changes. And but I do go off of that, like the beginning of the year, I go off of that Acadience data that I have to make my groups.
This is so helpful. Thank you for, really getting in the trenches here. And I'm so excited because this is like the exact conversation I've been really, really wanting to have with a teacher. So thank you for engaging in this conversation with us.
No problem.
Absolutely.
Melissa, any thoughts?
Ready?
I have a couple more questions, but do you want to, I guess, where do you want to go from here?
I mean, I'm really interested to hear what Lindsay has to say about sound walls. I think that's going to be a great conversation. So, can I frame it a little bit first for everybody?
Sure. Yes, because you're very good at that, Melissa. Go ahead.
Well, we talked with Julia Lindsay, who's a researcher about sound walls. And, she said what also came out in Tim Shanahan's blog this week of like, there is no research for sound walls, right? And that is the truth, right? No one has done a research study on sound walls. Say it has impact. But Lindsay, I think what I'd love to hear from you is, like you said, there's science that it's based on, right? It's not just like totally out of left field.
Right.
But more importantly, I think you've been using them. So I think that what we'd love to hear, like they're so popular right now. And I think what people need to hear is like, how are you actually using it and how has it been beneficial for you and your students?
Okay. So this is my 4th year using a sound wall.
You're like a veteran sound waller.
I know, right?
Way before the trend started.
Yes, totally. Very proud of that. No. So I love it. Okay. But I don't think the magic of the sound wall is in the sound wall itself. Right. And so I see that a lot where people are, kind of maybe hyper-focused on the sound wall. The sound wall is not the main event in my classroom. The main event in my classroom is my explicit, systematic instruction, like my direct instruction. The sound wall is just a shadow of what's happening in the classroom, right? It's a reflection of what's happening. So, yes, now I explicitly teach the phonemes and the graphemes that represent them. So how great is it to have this tool on the wall that we can refer to as we're learning them, and just to help us solidify the sound symbol correspondences. That's what it does. And then additionally, there is research. Ari has some research about the articulatory features and teaching the students the articulatory features of those phonemes. And so that's what we do with the sound wall, and like sound wall with quotes instruction, right? Is that now we don't need to get super technical, but we're going to draw an awareness to the sounds and to the individual phonemes. And so that's what I can do, is I can draw an awareness to what's happening with our mouth when we say the sound. And now we're going to connect it with a letter. And now we have this tool on the wall that's going to help us review them and remember them. And it's going to help us as we're writing and spelling. So it's great. And this is the first year. So before, I just made my own sound wall, and I took my own 4 children and I took pictures of their mouths and I put it up, and I made my own little phonics cards, and put them up on the wall. And this year I'm piloting a company's program. And it's,
look at you. That's cool.
And so it's really awesome, because now I have these little lessons that are so fun to follow, and that kind of teach me. I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't realize, I never thought about what my tongue was doing when I said that sound. Yeah. So that's kind of cool. And it's just, it's really easy. It's just Reading Horizons that has this little, they're doing this pilot at this great sound wall. So it's really fun. So that's the first, and before that I was always just kind of, which I was able to do it on my own, but this is just nice. Less to think about.
I was really impressed that you made your own. I was like, how she knows it. She knows all those.
I like watched so many, the Reading League had on YouTube, they have one. It's Don Durham presenting about sound walls. And I watched that like a couple times and just learned all I could. And then of course, reading, speech to print. And so in kindergarten, it was really just about changing my instruction from print to speech to print. Right. And so, and that's also I guess I didn't mention that, kind of the sound wall is helping kind of you do that, right? Like now I'm teaching from speech to print. So instead of letter of the day in kindergarten, I would have sound of the day. And so our sound of the day is okay, let's get out our mirrors. What's your mouth doing when we say and here's some words. Can you hear the sound in the words? And now we're going to connect it with a letter, at the end. So and it doesn't need to be long. So, right. It's just a few minutes, just draw their awareness to it and then move on with your instruction. So
I'm imagining this helping so many students more so, in so many ways, but, especially in articulation, in speech. Think about all of the reinforcement they're getting it's a very reciprocal teaching way to teach. I'm excited to hear how you use it. And I also love that you're keeping your instruction at the center, and this is a supportive tool and not the tool or the instruction. Yeah. We're totally going to inbox this to Tim Shanahan, because I feel like he would appreciate it. I think it really aligns with what, he mentioned in that piece about the pet peeves and sound walls. And, while there's not like a research base to support it, that's not how you're using it. You're using it as a tool to support students in speech to print.
Yeah. And then there's just little things that are, like you, like I mentioned earlier, how I have some students that are confusing E and I, like and so we look at the picture, the mouth picture, and then we look how that is just a little difference, but you can see. And so talking about that. And then like, this was kind of cool that happened. It was a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, but I was at my small group table and, we're doing our centers and I have a little boy that's sitting not too far from me. And I see he's in he's at the technology center. So he's working in the reading software and I can see that it's having him spell a word and he is missing the TH, right? And it's like just blank and blinking. And I can see, and so I see him look over at me because I'm like, oh, he doesn't remember, right? That digraph. And so I just pointed at my mouth and with my tongue between my teeth, like kind of asking him, is this what you're looking for? Right. And his eyes light up and he points at, and he does that and he nods his head. He's like, yes, that's what I'm like struggling with. And then I go and I just point to our sound while I point to the mouth picture with the tongue between the teeth. That was like, thankfully it was really pretty close to me. I point to it and then point under it where it has the TH. And he's like, he nods his head, gets excited, turns and puts it in. Right. Mm-hmm. So this is a way like he still needs help with some of those. Right. And so now where is he going to look next time? He's going to remember that. And he's going to look on the sound wall. Oh yeah. Until he gets it himself and then he'll have it. So anyway, it was just kind of I thought that was so cool. It only took like a few seconds and I'm back there at the small group table the whole time working with someone else, so it was neat. That's
really cool. And I think when we talked to Julia, we shared something about Dr. Stephanie Stoller. Do you know her, Lindsay?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I mean, she just had this quote that I keep coming back to, which is like, you have to know the science before you get to the sound wall, right? Like if you don't know that, don't even bother putting up the wall if you don't know the science behind it, which makes like, you know it, right? And that's really key, because if you're just putting it up there and then you don't know how to use it the way you are talking about.
Yes. And that is the problem now, because it's become such a trend,
right?
That everyone wants to put up a sound wall, but they don't really know why or how or what, or they're maybe not teaching all those things, but they're going to have them up there. It's,
I even remember some people in Baltimore, this was probably a year or so ago, who kind of talked about it as like interchangeable for a word wall. Right. And I could imagine like, instead of putting the word book under the letter B, put it under the sound.
Yeah.
But that doesn't really, I was like, not really doing what you want to do.
Yeah.
It's not helping you to teach students. Sounds.
Yeah. So
I think if we think about it, like you just shared, Lindsay, from speech to print, that's, I think, a helpful way to conceptualize it and to think about it. And then as the teacher, once you know the science, and I mean, I think we can encourage teachers, like, even if you're listening and you're just learning about the science, like, I don't think you have to be an expert in order to try this out. Right. Like, I want to name that as well. I think that's important to say.
Right. And definitely it was a growing experience for me, right? Because I put it up first and I'm still learning about it, and it's also great as a teacher just to kind of realize, oh yeah, look at all these sounds we have in our language and the ways to spell them, and so, it's a gradual process.
Yeah. I think it's a great way to be vulnerable too with your students. Like, hey, I'm learning about this too. And I think it would be a great tool to try out. I mean, maybe not, and that's okay. But I find so much value in kids seeing vulnerability and teachers trying something new and being honest about that. So I think that, and it does like really, I think, bring you together as a class team and,
Yeah. But, at the end of the day, it's not like the thing that's going to
correct.
It's like I said, it's not the main event. It's my instruction is right.
Yeah,
so,
your
and
instruction is strong.
The learning is I guess I should say the learning the students.
Right.
That's the main event. So anyone can throw a poster up on the wall. Right.
Yeah.
So it's just how you use it, how you interact with it.
I know. That's what I think too. I'm like, oh, some of the posters I had back in the day, I don't know that I would put up again, but I didn't know that until I tried it.
Well, I had a poster that was like, guess the covered word. And it was, so definitely anyone putting up a sound wall and not understanding it is better than that. Right.
Yes. Totally fair. So speaking of that, one thing that you mentioned on the Science of Reading podcast that I just wanted to like dig in with you a little bit was around idea of like having some guilt over some things you did in the past, like
yes.
the one you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to, I think that the teachers can just really relate to that and feeling like,
I mean,
we get a lot of emails from teachers about this.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, the teacher guilt is a real thing. And I think back about, those students that I wasn't able to help. And I just, I feel awful. I wish I would have known what I know now. And especially with my son, I just think about, gosh, when he was in kindergarten, I could have done so much for him. But I didn't know. And I wouldn't have had so much clarity if it wasn't for him,
Right,
so I feel so bad. He's the reason though, that, I know what I know and that I can be an effective teacher now is all because of him. And, so I taught a presentation once and the teacher came up to me afterwards, just crying, like, what? And she's like, why didn't anyone tell us this? Like, think of all the students I could have helped. And so it's just hard. It's tragic. And, it's like going through the steps of grief, and you get a lot of denial at first. Right. And we hear those stories or now you hear the people that are upset and and it's hard because certainly like not everything you're doing is harmful. And some of it is though, but not for all students. So that's what makes it kind of tricky. And so it's hard. And I just, my heart goes out to teachers because I was one of them. So I know how that feels. But I just think we have to, I love the phrase we have, know better, do better. And that's what we've got to just move past it. And we got to forgive each other.
Mm-hmm. I think that brings us to a piece of advice that you'd like to leave for educators. Any thoughts on what you'd like to share with those listening?
Yeah, I have, a blog on like first steps with the science of reading. And I just think it's baby steps. So it's just, it can be overwhelming to think, oh my goodness, I have to overhaul everything I'm doing. Yeah. You just, and you might not, right? But it's just one foot in front of the others and, choose one thing at a time and just take small steps. So, and I said this, have grace with yourself and with others.
We will definitely link your blog. I have it all ready to go in the show notes. We'll link your article, which I know is on your blog, but we'll directly link that since we talked about it. We'll link books. We will post everything that we've talked about. Awesome. But we just want to thank you for being so honest today and for taking a deep dive and being very specific about what you do to support your students. And we just can't thank you enough. Your students are so lucky to have you. Your kids are so lucky to have you. And the education community is lucky as well. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was so great to meet you.
Nice to meet you guys too.
Thank you so much for listening, literacy lovers. Be sure to visit our website to subscribe to our newsletter and podcast. It's literacypodcast.com.
Yep. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Most of them are at Literacy Podcast.
Yes. And please, please, please reach out to us. Melissa, what's our email address?
Melissa and Lori at literacypodcast.com is our email address. And we love getting emails from you all. And Lori and I
really read them.
Yeah, we really respond. It's fun. We love when you all reach out and we get to have conversations with you. So please email us.
Let us know what you're thinking, what you're thinking about literacy, what you're thinking about
ideas for us to podcast about.
Yes, ideas for podcasting, anything. We love to hear from you, what you liked, what you want. Yeah, we're here for you.
Mostly y'all are asking questions, which is great.
Yes.
We don't mind that either.
Yes. We're so glad you're here to learn with us.
Thank you, everybody.